Hi, everyone. This is Christine Chen, Executive Director of Asian and Pacific Islander American Vote. We are a national Asian American Pacific Islander organization focused on increasing civic and voter participation on the federal, state, and local levels by engaging Asian American Pacific Islander nonprofits in doing this work. To quickly get started, I will go ahead and just turn it over to Karthik Ramakrishnan, who is the principal researcher for the National Asian American Survey of 2012. He is a professor at UC Riverside.
Great. Thank you, Christine. And hopefully, great. Let me just put the slideshow on. So this is, in addition to people here, we're recording this for any reporters that would find the contextual information useful. I should note that since we had our last briefing, we've had a good amount of press coverage, including a couple of segments on MSNBC, one of them where Christine Chen, Toby Chowdhury, and I were on. And you can find information about that on our website and APIA Vote's website as well. We were also featured on All Things Considered over the weekend. And we'll post a link to that on our website soon. I'm just going to say a little bit that I've said before in terms of motivating the study and why people should care about Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. We're now pretty familiar with the statistics in terms of this being the fastest growing racial group between 2000 and 2010. Asian Americans grew by 46% between those two census years. Versus 10% for the overall population. Today, if you count Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, regardless of age and citizenship status, there are over 18 million residents in the United States. They're an important part in particular states like California. There are 15% of residents and 10% of registered voters in California. There were 9% of those who actually voted in 2008 in California, and they will likely be 10% or more this time around. The reason why the Asian American electorate continues to grow, there were about 600,000 new voters in 2008, and we anticipate similar or even larger amounts this year, and this is because you have an immigrant population that is getting more settled over time. You're also seeing the growth of the second generation population. This population is getting older and entering into voting age or entering into middle adulthood, and therefore more likely to participate in the electoral process. In terms of battleground states, Asian Americans will play the most significant role in Nevada and Virginia, and already you see both campaigns engaged in significant efforts there. We're also seeing in North Carolina that the Asian American vote, even though it's smaller than in those two other states, still greater than the margin of victory from last time around. Upstate, relatively smaller Asian American populations, but still could be crucial, are Ohio and Florida this year. One of the motivations to pay attention to this population is that in the last 20 years, they have had the strongest shift in their voting preferences. So this is looking at the National Election Pool data. This is data collected by an outfit that furnishes information to CNN, New York Times, etc. And what they have found, and these interviews are conducted only in English and Spanish, so that is one limitation to this study. But we can still compare those who did the English language interviews over time. And we see that Asian Americans went from less than a third voting for Bill Clinton in 1992 to nearly two-thirds, 62%, voting for Obama in 2008. The thing about our survey is that we conduct interviews in 10 Asian languages in addition to English, and that helps us tremendously in terms of getting into the Asian American population. About over 40% of our interviews are done in language. Now, just because you see this trend towards the Democratic presidential candidate, the other major important pattern to know about the Asian American community is the large proportion of people who are nonpartisan. This includes both those who explicitly self-identify as independent but also those who say don't know or I don't think in terms of parties. When you add those two together, over one half, so it's 51% of the Asian American electorate is nonpartisan. Among the rest, Democrats enjoy about a 2-to-1 advantage in terms of party identification over Republicans. One thing I should note is that party identification is measured regardless of what one's party registration is. So you could still identify with, say, the Democrat or Republican Party, but be registered as declined a state in a state like California. In terms of the update in this particular report, our last report had results of interviews conducted through September 20th. Since then, there have been two major dynamics in the race. One is Mitt Romney's 47% video leak that generated coverage for about a week. And then subsequently on October 3rd, you had the first presidential debate. And what you found in terms of the national population was that support for Obama eroded a little bit and support for Romney increased significantly, so much so that you have some national polls where Mitt Romney is leading Barack Obama by a few percentage points. So we wanted to see what changed, if anything, for the Asian American vote from the last time when we did this, when we did our report, which is on data through September 20th. And what we find is that among those who were interviewed after September 20th, you actually see a gain for Barack Obama. So now he has a majority of support among Asian American voters. With Romney, you actually see a slight decline, but as you'll see at the bottom of that slide, it's within the margin of error. So, you know, we need more data to be confident of that point estimate. But at the very least, we can say that support for Obama has strengthened. In terms of the proportion of undecided voters, it's essentially the same. It goes down from 32% to 30%, but that's within the margin of error. You also have in this table the number of likely voters that we use to base our estimate in the sample and the related margin of error. So when it comes to you see a strengthening of support for Obama after when we last issued our report. Now, how about the first presidential debate? Is there any difference before the debate or after the debate? By the way, I should note that this report is available for download from our website, naasurvey.com. That's the National Asian American Survey.com. We find that support for Obama before and after the debate is essentially unchanged. We do see a slight bump up, but that is well within the margin of error. Now the sample sizes are getting smaller after we go after the October 4th, from October 4th through October 15th. In terms of Romney's support is holds steady. Proportion of undecided voters goes down a little bit. It looks like the undecided voters are starting to break a little bit towards Obama. But essentially, the big thing to note is that the pattern that you see at the national level in terms of the significant shift away from Obama and towards Romney, we do not see that for the Asian American vote in the interviews that we have conducted. In terms of candidate preferences on the issues, this is what we had in our last report that we released on September 25th with data through September 20th. We found that Obama, likely voters preferred Obama on most of the issues that we asked about, ranging from women's rights through foreign policy. On the budget deficit, they gave a slight preference to Romney over Obama, although that was within the survey's margin of error. Looking to our more recent data, the pattern is almost identical. You see a similar level of advantage across issues, and the budget deficit is essentially a tie now. The one thing to note, and I'll go back and forth just to see if you can look at the difference, is on women's rights. Before, Obama had a 71-12 advantage on women's rights issues among likely voters who are Asian American, and now that's gone down 65% to 19%. It's still an enormous advantage that Obama has on women's rights issues, but that has eroded a little bit. So I'll leave it at that. That's the update that we have. There are some other findings from our September 25th report if people want questions about particular national origin groups. We don't have enough sample size on likely voters. This is a survey of all adult residents, so the proportion of likely voters is smaller than what we actually have interviews for. So we don't have enough sample size to report on the national origin differences. One thing I can say is that from the data that we have, the patterns after September 20th look very similar to the patterns that we had before September 20th. Strongest support for Obama over Romney among Indian Americans and also among Japanese Americans and Chinese Americans. It's gotten stronger since our last report. Filipinos still back Romney over Obama in the data that we've collected after September 20th. And for Vietnamese, they seem to be breaking towards Obama among those who are undecided. Again, we don't report out the actual numbers on this because the sample sizes are too small and the margins of errors are too big for them to be helpful. But essentially, the patterns that we found in our prior report for national origin generally hold true now. So I'll leave it at that. If people have questions on anything else from our prior report, I'm happy to go into them or to discuss some of the findings from this report.
Does anyone have any questions? If so, go ahead and raise your hand, or if you like, you can also type in your question down below.
I think Daphne has your hand.
Yes. Daphne, I will go ahead and unmute you. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so what is your sense of why the Asians did move from like 43 to 50% for Obama and went down from, I mean, 24 to 19?
Right. So that's that's a good question. And the sense I get is that this is mostly related to the fact that Asian Americans live in very blue states. So the extent to which people are starting to make up their minds and breaking towards Obama, I think is reflective of that fact. So when people talk to friends and neighbors, when they talk to coworkers who may be Asian or non-Asian, they are more likely to vote similar to those in their networks. We certainly, I mean, it's not. I don't think there's been any different coverage of the presidential campaign in ethnic media as opposed to mainstream media. But it's possible. It's possible that ethnic media were not as trigger happy when it came to either the 47% comment or the presidential debate. Because if ethnic media coverage were the same as mainstream media coverage, then you would have anticipated a different kind of a pattern, that you would have anticipated more of a shift towards Romney, at least certainly after the first presidential debate.
Karthik, we have also another question here. Let's see. It says, you mentioned margin of error for a group report is too big. Can you give us specific digits on that? Will you continue doing the survey to make a reasonable sample? And then what states do you survey in? Can you give us a reason why North Carolina has a big share of AAPI voters? Why not New York or Texas?
Okay, sure. Okay, so on the first question, in terms of margins of error on the groups, we essentially, this survey is trying to serve two purposes. One is to say something about the presidential election as it occurs, as the campaigns unfold, but also to dig much deeper into various issues that the Asian American community cares about. So our budget is pretty much maxed out at this point. We are still continuing to collect information on Indians and Filipinos because we are a little bit behind in terms of collecting data on them. So we'll continue to have larger samples of those groups. So for those two groups, and those would be interesting. So I think for Filipinos especially, we will have large enough sample sizes to get within plus or minus 8%. But that's still large. For the other groups, we're talking about margins of errors that are over 10%. and for some of them 15%. So it becomes really unwieldy. I mean, we can still probably say, given where for most groups, we can probably still say that they favor Obama over Romney, even with those high margins of errors. But it'll get dicey for some of the other groups. In terms of what states did we do our survey in, and this is for the entire survey, we dialed numbers in all 50 states. I haven't looked to see if we have completed interviews from all 50 states. It's probably unlikely. There may be a few states like, say, Wyoming or Montana where we don't have interviews. But this is a nationally representative survey. In terms of the final question there, in terms of why North Carolina has a big share, North Carolina actually does not have a big share of AAPI voters, but it did have a very small margin of victory for Obama in 2008. So the reason why we talk about these battleground states is that we look at battleground states where the Asian American share of the population is roughly similar to or greater than the vote margin in 2008 and what people anticipate the vote to be this time around. So New York and Texas and New Jersey and Illinois, these are all very important states for the Asian American population, and certainly California and Hawaii, where in Hawaii they're a majority of the electorate. In California, they're about 10% of the electorate. And they'll play a big role in statewide elections in those areas. But when it comes to the presidential race, it's the battleground states that are getting the most attention in terms of media attention, in terms of advertising. And for those reasons, that is why we look at states like North Carolina, where the population of Asian Americans is considerably smaller in terms of percentage of the electorate than places like New York, New Jersey, and California, but close to the margin of victory, either if you look at 2008 or the anticipated margin of victory now in 2012.
Karthik, we have another question. Let me read this off to you. This is from Eugene. Since there hasn't been much of a change following the 47% comment or the debate, one possible interpretation of the large percentage of undecided Asian American voters is that they are the type of undecided voter that is likely to be blue. This seems to be how your statement about Asian Americans living primarily in blue states and the effect of their networks in those states. Is this a sense you get from the undecided population? And if so, from what specific segments of the Asian American undecided population ethnically? Thanks.
Right.
In addition to California, what about the percentage of AAPI voters in other states like New York, New Jersey? Can you give more specific data on this?
Okay, so for that second question, if this is a reporter, I'm happy to do so after this call. I have those tables handy in my computer. I just need to go and find them in terms of the larger states. One thing I should say is that we have this data also in our 2008 book, Asian American Political Participation, that came out from Russell Sage Foundation. But if you can just email me, karthick @ucr.edu after this call, I can send you that information, or you can call me on my cell, 818-305-4865. In terms of the first question that Eugene posed, yes. So I mean, I need to look at the analysis to see if it's happening among the undecided voters. I mean, that's the sense. So what we see from before September 21st and after September 21st is that there does seem to be an erosion also in terms of the vote for Romney. So some of that gain that you see comes from the undecided going down from 32% to 30%, but there does also seem to be an erosion among Romney. Now that said, if you remember, I said that these two findings are within the margin of error, so we don't want to play it up too much, but we would expect that the greatest effect would be among undecided voters. But it could also be among voters whose preferences for the candidates were not that strong and who are starting to change their minds after talking to friends, neighbors, and coworkers. They happen to live in states like California, New York, New Jersey, and Illinois, Hawaii, that are, strongly in favor of Obama. You might even get some conversion among people who are leaning towards Romney, who are then changing their minds. I mean, at least that's what the data seem to suggest. But I would agree that the greatest effect is likely among undecided voters. In terms of which voters are most amenable to this, so the greatest proportion of undecided that we found from last time was among Vietnamese voters. And even though the sample sizes are too small for Vietnamese in this post period to break them out, in particular, among those people, we do see a significant shift towards Obama. So among Vietnamese American voters, with that large proportion of undecided, it seems that the majority of them are breaking towards Barack Obama, and that's a big shift from what we've seen in the past. And that's one thing that's important to note, is that what we find for Vietnamese Americans, more generally in our report on party identification and also on vote choice, is consistent with two other surveys that were conducted this year. One is the Lake Research Survey that was a partnership with API Vote and AAJC, and that indicated essentially a split party identification among Vietnamese. That breaks with what we have known about the Vietnamese population for many years. It's also consistent with the Pew survey of Asian Americans that was conducted earlier this year.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, great. Seeing none, we will go ahead and close out the webinar. Just to remind all of you, this has been recorded and will be uploaded onto the APIA Vote website. In addition, this presentation will be uploaded onto the National Asian American Survey website, which is www.naasurvey.com. Thank you very much, and thank you, Karthik.
Thank you.